we always need to create momentum, emotional alignment on what's ahead. Use those as monumental moments to bring stakeholders in. CX has to be accountable to something. Other groups that are super accountable to performance are going to look to say everything you provide me is just noise.
My name is Jochem van Veer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called TheyDo, the journey management platform for business decision-making. We raised over $50 million and are growing globally. Our enterprise customers include Ford, J&J, the Home Depot, and Pfizer. I mean, wherever you look, understanding customers is key to staying ahead. But in order to do this at scale, aligning so many different teams with the customer journey is incredibly hard, but it is possible. I really wish this podcast existed before we started our company because so many companies are organizing around journeys and there's so much to learn. So in order to share what I'm learning, what I'm hearing with our community, I meet with industry experts. And in my video podcast, I'm here to explore the world of business strategy, design, and journeys, customer journeys, to really get an understanding of how leaders are changing their way in their business. So let's dive into the show. So my guest today is Ben Geheb. He's the Global Chief Experience Strategy Officer at VML. They are a global leader in customer experience strategy. They're helping brands to stay ahead. And his insights have been featured in HBR and VML's Future Shopper 2024 report, basically shaping the conversation on digital transformation, consumer trends, and he specializes in aligning business goals with customer-centric innovation. To name a few of his customers, clients that he works with, Ford, Google, New Balance, United Rental, he's right there when it comes to the future of experience strategy, designing solutions that don't just meet customer needs, but also anticipate them, which is going to be one of the topics for today. So very happy to have you here, Ben. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I want to start with something light and have a little bit of fun. So CX, customer experience, is often filled with jargon. Even we talk a lot about journeys, right? And that's even considered jargon. So I just want to hear from you. Like, what is the jargon that you're like, we should stop doing that? And how do we actually move beyond like buzzword bingo and get to impact?
Oh, geez. It's a great question. One, my original thought was journeys on journeys on journeys on journeys. It's like when in doubt, if someone's not sure what to talk about, they spray journey and it can mean any altitude of thinking. Um, Probably one of the most overused words and probably the most misleading or confusing words that are out there for us. The other catch-all is just like business impact or consumer impact. I think for me, whether these are technically jargon or not, I think what I usually have a watch out for are words that are heavy. They could mean about 12 different things, and I don't think people are focused hard enough to really understand what they're trying to express in that. And so it's easier to just jump to, uh, you know, to unlock value. And you're like, well, what kind of value? And they're like, just value. And then you're like, well, I can't optimize the value. Like that's really hard to, execute. So, that's probably, those two are probably the bane of my existence in terms of, figuring out what people really mean when we hit the jargon and
I love that. So let's do journeys then. So how should we be positioning them in the correct way, or like how should we be talking about them without saying everything and nothing at the same time?
oof. It's like the same as strategy. There's a strategy for everything, but yet not everything's the same strategy. I think at some point somebody did mention this, the difference between customer journeys and, user stories and user journeys. And, I always think about this as just how they're being used. And, what is the decision trying to be made? So if I'm honest, I'm not usually allergic to the word journey. I just think it gets used as a meaning for the output. So when I actually think about the output, I think about, okay, is it the journey to tee up strategic opportunity areas to unlock growth? Well, let's call those opportunity areas, not like understand the journey and find moments. If this is about, dissecting where and how we should show up, a journey should facilitate that, but we can't just say like we need to optimize the journey. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So I don't necessarily steer in terms of finding a new word for journey. I steer away from it to say what is the problem that we're actually solving for, and can we just use those words instead?
Yeah.
And a journey is a mechanism and a framework to think about the problem and kind of
Yeah,
structure the problem differently.
I love that, and this is so important because like we are a journey management platform, right? So at first, people might think like, oh yeah, we have a bunch of journey maps, and you need to manage the maps, right? So that's like journey management. But the point is, to your point, what are the decisions we're going to make? What is the problem we're solving? And how is getting more clarity about our different data in the same context, the journey, is going to help us make that decision. So it actually starts with that question, and then journeys are a tool, if I may summarize you correctly.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I think it often just gets misled that the journey is going to be your answer. And you're like, well, that just, to what you're saying is, you know, it provides an input and maybe a small output along the way, but, no one's optimizing for
Yeah.
articulated journey. It needs to bring action into the world. So,
Right. And we see a lot of CX teams like mapping for the sake of mapping. Like, so let's get all these journeys in place. And then at the end of the year, you look back and like, okay, great. We have overview and then what? So how
yeah.
should we think about what is a good customer experience initiative and what is a bad one? Like it's really hard for these teams to articulate the value they're creating
Mhm.
in a specific way. And then a lot of these initiatives are backward looking or not needle movers or just output oriented and there's no action. So how would you go about giving a client of yours or helping your teams to really set up a project for success or an initiative for success? What is a good CX initiative and how do we distinguish it from a bad one?
Yeah. I mean, upfront, this may sound like ungodly simple, but do we really know what we're optimizing towards? I think people see a problem. They see the patient is sick, and they don't really align what success looks like early, and they just go automatically almost into solutioning. One of the solutions, if they skip some of the critical analyses, could be, well, let's just document the journey, and it'll tell us where to go. Yet they haven't really aligned even before that happens to say what does success look like. So, I think one, that I think is big is let's make sure that we know the problem that we're actually solving. What is that situation? What's the challenge and tension? And then what does success look like in the end? What are we driving for? I think the second part then, while there's certainly kind of human-centered insights, let's go build a journey. And I'm a big believer in, say, jobs to be done and bringing those into the moments for how we craft very human-centric journeys, kind of as like a above the line, if you will. And then underneath, we can kind of always codify where and how an organization shows up in that. Um, but I think in the end, when you say, "Hey, is this a good CX project or not?" I would say, do we have clear objectives, and do we understand how this ties to the overall business objectives that they come? Just chances are, a lot of CX initiatives take future investment, and if it's not aligned to a business, objective, and given the crazy volatility, the market's in right now, those investments come under more scrutiny now. So we need to make sure that there's clear ways to measure and have a measurement structure from the get go, on that. And then I think on the backside is making sure that we've got a plan for action. I think the biggest thing that people also then have is it's easy to think, it's easy to dream about making. It's really hard to make. And I think in a lot of our organizations, my first question, or I guess my second question, would be how does work get made? Is that a product team? Is there a separate team that manages the channels? And maybe you'd be surprised, maybe not. A lot of people don't know how work gets made. They're not sure the pathway. They think once there's a rationale in terms of how it should get made, um, it just happens. And I think that gap between thinking and making, and then making and scaling, those gaps are humongous. And so to me, we if we have the right foundation of a real human-centered problem, there's tension to be solved, there's a good business problem. So that's an interesting CX initiative. Let's go do all the homework and a bunch of different ways of doing discovery and definition and synthesis and rationalizing it. But even from day one, if you don't have an appreciation for how things get actually made and come off a slide and don't bake that into your solutioning, you're going to run into almost endless headaches. And that is usually a scary part for me, because I'm going to say, hey, we're probably just going to burn some money without getting to impact. So that's one of the, I think, the unique angles that I like to think about early on, is strategy is only as good as the making that comes from it. So if you don't know how it's going to get made, you might have the world's greatest strategy, but it really don't matter. And I think that goes for CX initiatives. You could have a great CX initiative, but if it never actually gets in the world, it doesn't make a difference. And to get things into the world can be shockingly challenging.
Yeah, and it's also like what you're saying is, I think, prevalent in so many teams. Like we have all the data, we can see the problems clearly, and we can make them as big as we want, and we can send fancy PowerPoints across different teams. But then there's no action, and then we get demotivated because people have other priorities, and we think our organization is not necessarily customer centric, and then you enter like this whole like vicious cycle or doom loop, if you will. So you're working with some of the leading brands, and this is not like a tactical exercise. So when you're engaging in customer experience strategy, CX is never a single function. It's not like a silo that sits in an organization. So how do you get teams from looking at the data and presenting these great ideas on paper to actually a business leader moving them forward? Is that having a different conversation early on? Is that the trick, and is that less necessary? I'm sure it is, but is it really about having that like strategic lens into an organization, or should we be more thinking about, let's get a bunch of small wins, let's show that it works? What is the most effective way to actually get this organization moving?
I think what's interesting is probably it depends on the type of quote CX work. It can mean so many
Mm,
different things. So, we've got some with ongoing clients, which are how do I diagnose our existing relationships with owners or prospects, use the data to understand where and how we're showing up today, and how do I leverage our channels and footprint, both owned and third party, to optimize those relationships and target them in really interesting ways, and not just like media target. I mean, like think about the holistic experience and really answer those. As I start to do that, I'm going to distill the business case, the problem to solve, and I'm going to roll that up into a really compelling kind of pitch to all of the channel owners. Because in a lot of organizations, structurally, they're organized by channels because
right.
that's just how the company grew, unless they're really really modernized. And in that case, I need to bring them to a centralized place so that we can all align that this is a critical problem, so that we go out together. If I just create solutions and I go to the channels later, like I have a backlog and a bunch of priorities, like no thank you. And you could end up with like half a baby. That's not effective. We need everybody to kind of be in together. The other side is if I'm going from, I just have a big problem, like, if I break down some of the work that we've done historically, say for Ford, we want to optimize and enhance how they do vehicle service. And so in that case, I can go look at big spaces. I'm optimizing the ecosystem at this point. I'm doing product and service innovation. And in that case, the reason why it's different is I'm going to go create the concepts and solutions that lead to something like pickup and delivery or mobile service. And in that case, I might do some more, um, proof of concept, piloting. Let's demonstrate value. The investment's big in that case. There's a lot of human capital, that's needed, and physical capital in that. So it's a lot of investments needed. So I got to go buy down that risk. So I'm going to do kind of start small, demonstrate value, and kind of buy down the risk. So just the approaches, could be different. There's one aspect. I was kind of talking that was in the middle of it, which is if this is a new muscle for the organization, demonstrating quick wins is fantastic. So we might literally start with something really small, just to demonstrate the power of acting and doing something that's different. Um, but under that, I would bring that problem to say, if an organization is somewhat siloed and fragmented, let's create a ceremony that brings them together, align, rally behind a common problem and priority, but then keep it small, just so we can move quick, demonstrate value. But when we have that, have an eye or a knack for where's the path for scaling. So you don't ask that afterwards. You already have that planned into kind of your mental model.
Right. Okay. So I want to dig into ceremonies, but before I do that, is it fair to say that in the Ford's case, you got the assignment to do this from a team that was experienced enough to see the benefits of like this holistic systems design, or did that occur to you from your side of the world, where it was obvious, and then you pitched it and it became a business case, and then it became a thing? What I'm asking for is like you talk about is it a new muscle for an organization? Then you need quick wins, small wins to show that the approach is working. But in
Mhm.
a lot of organizations, the step after that is already initiated. People think it's important, but they just don't know how to make it effective or roll this out at scale. Like, was that the case in Ford, or did you have to create that momentum for yourself?
Uh, I'm probably a believer that we always need to create momentum. I think in that case, the one that I was giving, you know, Achilles heel of a lot of vehicle ownership is the success of a service experience. And so in that case, it's kind of common knowledge in that. Yet I do need to sell someone on the solution. And is it worth it? And how this would be different and what the impact would be. That's one example of many,
Mm.
that we've had, with Ford, but our other client partners as well. And I think as you get toward the more core group that you're working with, you're rallied together. I mean, we've done large scale subscription service or elevated paid services. We've had to create full business models, and those that are closer, like this is the problem and this is why it's paid. But then you get to outer circles, and right, we're all fighting for the same, and different pieces of the same investment piggy bank. And so I think under that case, I just always anticipate that there is scrutiny somewhere, which is the reason to say seldom do you just get the blessing to like go forth and launch. We need a plan that says this is what it is. It's like pitching your own business. I mean, the more that you can kind of get, I think, just that angst that says like I've got to pitch this thing with my whole passion and interest on behalf of. I mean, as an agency partner, I can say this is like my belief is we're in it with our client partners, and together we are pitching this thing like success for both. And I think with that, in assuming that nobody gets a clear path to run, one, it helps create a better story, but two, I think it fuels a little bit more passion to make sure that the experiences are well-rounded. There's no doubt, though, I'll admit, if you get some executive oversight that, from the high ups for Ford, we, have some wonderful stakeholders that help clear that path. For other clients, similarly, but others, we don't have that same executive buy-in. And so if you don't have executive buy-in, the road can definitely be a little bumpier, for sure.
Right. There's almost this element of selling slash strategic that has nothing to do with customer experience at all, right? And obviously as a large agency, you're in a position to do that, right? You have a brand, you have all the case studies, you have a team to execute on that. They come to you for this type of work. When there is an in-house function, customer experience function that sits on the same level of understanding the strategy and the whole, they're still in CX. Right, so they have that label. Do you think that is a nice way to think about splitting those two, or you think people in-house should just be as good as selling and pitching in the business case as maybe your company would be doing?
Um, I think we just both share the burden.
Yeah.
Somebody once told me, an agency, and I've got a past being on the consultancy side. To me, those worlds are somebody just picked different names, but the same. You can only be as good as the client that you're working with. If the client's not sharp, savvy, and knows where to go, you're going to hit a lot of roads and a lot of ceilings that you just, isn't fruitful. But to be honest, the buck stops with them. And so you can steer as hard as you want, but you're not going to go. So, to your question that gets asked, I mean, to be honest, I think we can tell amazing stories. And there's a human element to CX that's not about the customer. It is about just the human element of how work gets following and supported in an organization, from the rationale to the storytelling to the change management that gets underplayed a lot in CX. And so I think, at least in my view, I would love a very savvy, very sound client partner that may not be the best at storytelling, that we can help match their skills and then come together about what the best storytelling is. Not I would say, I think as a client partner, I would be less excited if I had a really good storyteller but they knew nothing about CX. I actually think that would be harder, because I'm looking for a partner to kind of get in the trenches together and really like get through it. It doesn't mean that they need to be the same expert. I mean, we should be complementary to our skill set. So I mean, maybe if they're a good storyteller, good salesman, I'd at least want them to have a passion to the problem that they have, and that this isn't just a development of something that they're just going to sell,
No,
on
and
their
because it's
behalf.
like CX, like customer is the centerpiece of it all. That's why it can be all encompassing almost, right? If you come from a
Hmm.
marketing agency or a martech background, like this will not be your MO, but it's like you're coming almost like with a full operationalized perspective to the business that is so much more than just like, oh, let's be customer centric, or
Yeah.
let's just figure out this one problem. So let's talk about rituals a little bit, because that's the other piece that I'm also seeing. When we're doing it once, it's all great and all nice, and we move on to the next project. But what you want is sustained decision making, sustained alignment around this way of working. So even if you start small with the ones that have maybe like a not necessary capability, bringing those rituals in, but also with the more mature customers, like this is important. So talk to me
Mm.
about those ceremonies. Like, what do you do? How do you think about them? What do you have in mind when you talk about ceremonies?
Yeah. I think you hit it perfectly with kind of moments of alignment. I mean, I would say any minute that myself, my team, also our client partner is spending, we should be making decisions. We should be so the idea of a ceremony as a check-in is not my favorite thing to do. Like statuses can be happen through emails or some type of analysis we can send bullets, we can get that through. Too many ceremonies are based on just kind of like, let's do a QBR and like let's go update this, and then they're not decision making, they're weather reporting. It's just not my jam. But I think the idea of if you angle any of those touch points, weekly statuses. We organize a lot around sprint planning. I tell anybody, like, work in 2 week sprints. They say, what's the magic of 2 weeks? I'd say nothing more than it's going to force you to have output every 2 weeks. And so you're going to naturally feel a progression because it's just problems can be so hard. You can totally get just lost in analysis and thought purgatory. So to me, I think about ceremonies small, check ins, sprint planning, and then larger kind of strategic dialogues, larger workshops. And in those cases, those are purposefully executed mainly to create alignment on perspective. And if I'm really honest, those bigger meetings, emotional alignment on what's ahead. Because you want to get ahead. Again, I'm thinking about how stuff gets made. I want to bring in the people that need to get made early in the process so we don't hit those roadblocks later. Everybody's aligned, they're excited, they've been a part of the solution. So I think those bigger dialogues, it's really about bringing stakeholders in and managing up, managing sideways, and bringing kind of an organization around for the next conversation and the next conversations. You're prepping, you're priming the system to go. And then the points between there are articulated in a way that is bringing increased alignment on your day-to-day leaders, their managers, their boss, your executive sponsor, and bring those decisions, into those forums to kind of
Yeah, I
move
think
move
you're
forward.
hitting on something important, right? With emotional alignment, I don't think that is not a common word, at least not something that I'm hearing a lot. But it is actually true, right? It's not necessarily like let's make a few smaller decisions, but it's like, do we all believe the same future is going to be materializing if we're going to go down this path? Are we all in alignment? Are we all 80% above the line? Like, are we there? And I think that's critical. But in a lot of organizations, these rituals already exist. These ceremonies already exist, right? Sprint planning, PI planning, QBRs, you mentioned them already.
Mm.
So how should we be thinking about them when there's a lot of these fora already available? Are we creating new ones specifically for our new customer experience strategy or improvement initiatives? Or should we tag along to the existing ones, but just make them better because we now also have the customer perspective in there? Like, does it vary? Like how
Yeah.
are large organizations doing that when they get your help?
Yeah, it's a great call. I mean, one of the other jobs around, I think, is what what's the heartbeat of an organization? How's it run? What's the seasonality? And I don't mean that literally seasonality, but like there's a cycle on which an organization runs, and that governance model, whether it be QBRs or other things, is a part of that cycle. But if I'm talking kind of New Balance or a lot of apparel, retail, they are season driven. So if I raise my hand, not at the moments that seasons are created, I'm kind of noise in the system. And so I've actually got to kind of hitch hitch on to those moments. Otherwise, we're kind of forgettable because those are the moments of which bigger decisions are being made. And so that's the window to go. So I think it's a good push. My answer back, and I think you had mentioned, is don't use those as status. Use those as monumental moments to bring stakeholders in of whatever level, from executive to whatever, into that narrative. So it should never be like a green, red, yellow. It should be a these are the hard decisions that we've made. These are the implications of the decisions. This is what we're wrestling next. Whatever that might be, maybe it's earlier on and we got to go validate kind of the impact or later. But I think you got to reimagine those, that you don't just follow the path of kind of a status update and providing a view on the progress, but demonstrate in those moments the most critical points of alignment, the critical decisions that are being made, and the implications, so that if you have naysayers around, they are able to kind of raise their hand early, so you can kind of address that. And as you said, emotional alignment to me, shared clarity, is just as important as the work. It yet could take so much more effort to kind of get big organizations, a lot of priorities, a lot of passions. A lot of people are incentivized in ways that are not aligned with the project. And it doesn't mean that they'd be against the project, just they're just measured to something else. And so you've got to almost convince them why this is really interesting, um, and come in with that kind of focus. So I think
Yeah.
ceremonies are great for that, big and small. I do think the idea for what you said, there are workshops and things that are asynchronous, but you do have to be knowledgeable. And we always say, I mean, as an agency partner, I mean, usually the question back first is, I appreciate the timeline. Do you have any big meetings that are coming up in the next 3 months that like we should just like? Do you have a board meeting? Is there like a senior an ELT? Is there like what meetings show up? Because to move work ahead by 2 weeks, we might run a little bit assumptive driven in some of these things, but it's more important to come into those moments buckled up and ready to rock than say, hey, sorry, we missed that window. We'll catch the next one next quarter when, then you're old. We got to go hit the hot
Right.
buttons in those moments.
No, no, this is a very good point. And then on a more like tactical level, when you think about like an agile organization that has like PI planning all the way back to bi-weekly or weekly sprint, 2 weekly sprints, the typical thing that I'm seeing is like these teams get measured on output, not necessarily on quality or impact. So if they get measured on output, and you come in and say, hey, look, everything that we've been planning on the roadmap and is like on the backlog has been faulty, wrong, or at least like baked on the wrong data. So here's the new priorities, right? You might say, oh, if you're measured on output, it doesn't really matter what you get, what you're building. And yet there's a lot of friction. Teams will say, no, we already planned this, so we're not going to do it. So who should be representing that? And does it also mean that we should bring the product leaders into the conversation early? Like, how do we infuse the right priorities from a customer experience perspective into these rolling machines, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's hard to intercept, say, some PI planning for a specific channel, service, product, whatever it might be, mainly because those teams are organized and they're trying to execute. And the last thing you want to do is be perceived as a noisemaker, out of cycle or even in cycle, right? They got a
Yeah.
job to do. They got things to do. So I think early on in the process, bringing product managers or product owners into your problem space, inviting them into the solutioning of it is really important. We always say the person kind of doing the inviting. I mean, I'll say this as an agency part. Someone has to own the point of view on the client side. This cannot be like decision by like it can't be, oh well, the agency pushes. No, someone is accountable to the work, and that person has to help bring in the people, but also represent the point of view in there. And I think if we're more deliberate about that, then bringing those groups is a little more effective. I would say later, as we get to more scaled working, you do want to make sure that a holistic experience gets brought out into channels more effectively. And if you just kind of brief and then go and then let the planning happen in their individual spaces, they can become way out of sync, which again, there's not much you can do with 30% of a experience that launched and some that's coming out in 2 weeks. So we need those need to be synced. And so somebody does have to do the battle. That product manager, that service manager, whatever you might want to call it, the experience manager in some organizations does need to help do the representation into those when their experience is starting to come to market. Doesn't mean that they always need to be present because it might just be in a different cycle. But I do think it's necessary to be present. Otherwise, paths to market into the world just get managed and executed in ways in which the channels just naturally are out of sync sometimes
Yeah.
just based on their own optimization.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. Do you want more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access? Check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation. But it also sounds like it's about influence, right? It's like whether it's a service manager, a CX manager, whoever, like typically they're in the CX department, backward looking, are doing a lot of survey analytics, text analytics, fantastic reporting and all of that. And all of a sudden they're becoming strategic and they have cross-functional insight and they have really good data on which opportunities to pursue. But that influence doesn't happen overnight. So what have you seen? Like, how are these people actually empowered to do the work, get influence, get more influence, and actually help these maybe like product-centric teams move forward? Like, any guidance you can share?
Yeah, it's probably a whole podcast topic in of itself. But we had this with another organization recently. They have a CX organization, and I would say the CX organization is accountable to nothing. You know, they're in charge of a lot of insights. Are we performing? And let me bring best practices, benchmarks, and insights to the teams. And then I'm just going to hope the teams that pick them up and kind of do better work. And the challenge of that, in my mind, to get the influence that you talked about, they're just noisemakers. Even if they're right, everybody's busy. So it's, I think the idea that you can really bring a motivating insight that really changes it is really challenging. And so with our kind of client partners, if there was a centralized CX entity, which can show up in a lot of organizations through different ways, maybe there's a CX group, maybe they own experiences and they have their own, maybe they're embedded in channels. There's a lot of organizational constructs which CX can go. But I think in my mind, CX has to be accountable to something. Even if you're not the direct owner of all the pieces, if you don't have accountability into the future for how those expectations and what you're reporting up in terms of your accomplishments, by default, other groups that are super accountable to performance are going to look to say everything you provide me is just noise, unless you just happen to be the best, most influential, charismatic person out there, which there are some wonderful people that can do that and they have that clout and they're able to kind of show up and people listen to it. But for a lot of organizations, that individual may not exist. And therefore it's always, well, what are you signing up for? Like, what's the accountability into it? And if you don't have that accountability, then I would say actually your biggest tension then comes to say, how do I integrate myself into that team so that I can help them clearly be better and drive results in their individual ways? But that might require then a group that you said, what's their skill? They probably have to become a chameleon, because the way in which I think about team A is probably different than how I need to show up in team B, which is different than team C. And I need that kind of agility to show up in different ways. So I'm not just spraying dashboards and reporting or documentation of journeys. I'm able to synthesize and reframe that it's useful for this experience or this channel, and then this other one and this one. But to me, it always comes to what's the accountability or assumed accountability, and how are they bringing that passion in? If those don't exist, it's just really hard for a CX organization to sit in the middle without eventually being perceived as kind of just another source of data, which I would just say that's not a great place to be, because there's a lot of sources of data.
Yeah, right. But it's actually a good point, being a chameleon, and then you're reframing basically what every customer experience professional wants. We all want to have impact, right? Want to have the seat at the table. But you're saying like, no, the onus is on you. You should be accountable for something, even if it's small.
That's the difference maker. You gotta want that. Yeah.
Yes. So how do I do that? Like if I'm in a CX or I'm listening, even a CXO in a notable organization can sometimes be like accountable for nothing other than reporting, looking back and giving people and feeding people with insights and basically doing a lot of the good work, but the output is, okay, you're creating the report. So how do they become accountable? Like embedding in the teams is one thing. Are there other
Hmm.
ways that they can own a part of the business? They can drive a part of the business, be accountable for something more meaningful than just reporting on insights.
Yeah, it probably comes down in my mind to like OKRs and some of the latter. CX is inherently integrates into the organization somewhere. And whoever they integrate to
Yeah.
does have objectives. And I think if I start to cascade the top line objectives and those executive ones down into the CX organization, I'd say which part of those can we own and how do we best track and take notes of what it is? And if those, just to use some words that you had earlier, if those are about volume, hey, I released 12 reports. I mean, does anybody care if it was 13 reports? No. I mean, it don't matter. If I am on the soft side saying my goal is CX to transform and create a customer-centric organization, well, now I got to go on the hunt for how do I measure and demonstrate the impact of customer centricity on the organization? And maybe that's different ways of working. It doesn't have to all be hard results. Could go into soft results, but I do need that accountability that how am I going to, at the end of the year, talk about the success that isn't volume based? It is true impact based and something that you would brag about to your dinner table with. I mean, you're not going to go home and brag to your family like, gosh, I really created the best reports in the world. But you probably would if you said, my fingerprints are all over how this company thinks, and I can demonstrate it by how they went to market here in this new product, whatever it might be. Um, I think the other side is if you notice a space in the organization that growth can become, can you go assume that accountability or join up with somebody? And it does. Some say, well, that's scary, puts me at risk. Well, yeah, I mean, of course. But if you're leading a CX organization and you want to sit at the big kids table, you have to assume some risk, which inherently unlocks accountability and kind of a position to be there. I think the last note on that one, which I found really interesting, we have one client partner that said, I don't own the coffee at our retail points. I don't own if it's dirty and grimy, or I don't own if somebody was rude. So while they lead CX, they can't own all of it. I mean, a customer experience in totality, if it's a summation of every engagement that you have with an organization, no one group owns all that, except if maybe you're the CEO, but they got other problems to worry about. No one owns every touch point. So um, it's hard to be the owner of that. So we've also had some other groups say, hey, this exists. We're all in partnership around this. So me as a CX organization, I own these products, these customer experience products. And the focus there is let me go identify the biggest moments that require really integrated solutions and new experiences. And I'm going to manage those experiences like products and pull the channels into it and make sure that collectively these points are maximally impactful. That's how, say, it was like Ford, pickup and delivery might happen. That's how if I went into like Sherwin, something like a fine color experience makes this. These are foundational experiences that take hand holding across multiple channels. And so I have seen that. Like maybe I just focus and own something because holistic ownership is hard. Um,
Right.
so
Ooh,
I
I
think you
like
get
that.
creative in it.
No, this is actually good because this is also one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. You have a really good feel for like trends and how this whole like customer centric transformation has been evolving over the last, let's say, decade. I think this is key. So customer centricity, has always been important. And then you have like these waves, right? And it's like massively important. And then it drops again. And now it's like massively important again. Everyone's investing in it. And we're seeing this. So CX is positioned often as like the first guinea pig to say like, okay, you're going to own this, you're going to drive this. And then they fail. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have big problems and other teams start to take over and then it's get messy. And then you need to bring in Ben and then save the show and try again. Right. But I think what you just said is good. Don't focus to be like holistically owning the end-to-end customer experience to make the customer-centric transformation to make your company completely customer-centric. Just cut off that piece of experience that you could potentially own. And end-to-end drive that, bring the teams together, bring the channel teams, the partners together, bring the delivery together, which is a good insight, I think, that not many people actually have when they start doing this, because they think because we have customer in our department's name, We should be owning that. Is that a trend that is something that you're seeing, or is that actually like your experience that is an insight for people listening? Is that something that you're seeing across the board happening?
I think it's more powerful when it happens. Is it a
Mm.
large scale trend? Not sure. But
Uh,
and I think it's just because if you're going to try to go do everything at all channels and all places, to be honest, the only way you're going to do that is tell the weather and reporting. You're
yeah.
going to end up doing a lot of voice to customer. It's great work. That's fine. But it's got to go into something. So if your CX organization, whatever it might look like in your business, you know, if you can be accountable to key moment performance, it starts to bring that level of focus. And I'm just such a believer that focus comes with greater depth and expertise and mastery in those moments to be able to unlock growth. That says if you're everywhere, then you're kind of nowhere. You just can't be in that many spots. And realistically, in organizations, no one owns all that stuff. So um, I would probably at least push and say, first step, what can you own versus not? And what's in
Yeah.
your control or near control versus what are you influencing? And what is just totally out of your reach. Like, I think leading with that can help make sure that you don't waste cycles pushing some stuff that exists in part of an organization that you have no access to and no influence. That's just, it might be the right answer, but it would be a total waste of time and energy just because you can't get access to it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think leading with that, I just think it's more helpful. If you don't have that, you're a different operating model of a CX organization. Say you're like a center of excellence or something like that. You got to measure success differently. You need executive buy-in differently because your results are different. And then just going back to where I think it's really spot on. The influence that you need to bring into those discussions, the swagger into it to avoid sounding like noise. I think that just dials up. Like you gotta be like on your game as a CX center of excellence that you don't become noise in the system and that people really are like, gosh, I can't operate without this group really
Right.
helping. And we've had great success. That's how New Balance is kind of set up. It's amazing. We have great executive buy-in. Client partners are wonderful. The way in which we go to market is awesome. And we partner with the different business units, lines, channels. But I think it's just because there's organizational buy-in and wonderful people on all sides of that world. This happen. In some of our other client partners, we have wonderful people. I just wouldn't say there's as much executive buy-in into it, and therefore, a center of excellence usually has a limited length of, I won't say
Yeah.
life
Right.
because they could carry on, but they'll have a limited length of impact.
But if you get to design the perfect org, would you say CX is a function or CX is a center of expertise or a center
Function,
of excellence?
yeah, function. I mean,
Is a function.
I like owning pieces, so maybe I'm just type A, and just like, but I think the idea of a function has sustainability to it. I think COEs, we live in a volatile market. If you're not accountable to some of the output and you don't have the
Yeah.
tangibility to it, you're always kind of at risk. And it's just, you don't want to be seen as a cost center in there. So I think helping be more of a function, if you will, or a path to direct impact has a more stickiness.
I think a lot of people that are in a COE right now that are listening are like, oh gosh.
Oh, sorry, people.
What are we doing? But maybe also a wake up call. Like, what do I actually own? What is my accountability to this? So that's a good like misconception people have when thinking about customer centricity and like the big transformation programs. It should be like end to end and we should own it all. What are some of the other misconceptions that people have when they think about like this big, hairy problem of becoming more customer centric or even becoming customer centric full stop? Like, what are some of the other things you've seen?
um, I think this will probably go back to one of the early points. Don't assume that there's a real human problem that the whole organization is going to rally to solve it. Like in the end, it might cost money. And $1 spent to solve that human problem, and it might be a big human problem. But if it doesn't really drive future growth, revenue, retention, it probably will get called. And someone might say that's not really human centered. I'd say, well, this is a long time ago in my like business model innovation days. We used to get this idea like, I mean, anybody can create a business that wants to do really good. The hard part is how do you make money and do good? If you only do good, there's a lot of great, you know. for, I guess, like volunteer work, things that can happen to be able to go do that. That's awesome. I just think in a lot of our business environments, that's not a sustainable CX organization. And so I really need to go find those points that have that true valued centeredness, that trade off between what is desirable, what is viable, and what is feasible, and steer into that. And good or bad, I find a lot of CX organizations can monitor NPS and satisfaction, come to the table and say, hey, this moment is dragging down our NPS, and say, we need to fix it. Sometimes the organization say, okay. And many times the organization goes, I don't
So
understand.
what?
Like, it's not the same currency. They're telling me if I invest in a factory, I get this much throughput. You're telling me if I invest in NPS, I get 1 point. I can't equate the impact. And therefore, like, it's so frustrating for those that can't see the need for that. So I think the
No.
misconception in that case is, sadly, sometimes the most human centered answers are just not the ones that we can bring forward. I will say, I would think about human centeredness as a portfolio of things that drive business value, and then things that might be less investment but are super human centered, that a brand should not only provide a reason for someone to engage, transact, and be, but you do need to spend a little extra for moments to love and fall in love with an organization, and have that excitement. You just can't bet the house on those moments. Otherwise, that I think that investment will get called to it. So that one, I think we used to see a lot more. I don't see it as much, but early days of CX call, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, I feel like there was a lot of like, if it brought sad faces to a customer journey and got labeled with like a down thumb, people were like, we got to go focus on that moment. I don't know, maybe,
All right.
but
Well,
maybe
have you
not.
seen any organization that's saying like, okay, NPS increased by X is increasing revenue by X? Like, I've never seen a model that truly predicts this over time. Have you ever seen that?
I've seen mixed. I mean, I would, if there's any people from Bain listening, they'd probably say that there is one, and if they have it, I think we should all see it. It's great. I just think when it manifests in an organization
Hmm.
down to that, it's a harder math. It's a hard math to do. So even if there is a model, which I'm sure somebody has a model, um, it's been harder. It's just hard to prove in organizations around it. It's not as direct. And to be honest, the people that you're asking for money for, even if there is a model, they don't know that model. They
No,
know like simple math. So.
no, it's typically different, right? It's like create value for your customers, create value for your business, and as a result, NPS will go up, and then they start to attribute it backwards, and that's how you can prove it. But anyway, maybe digressing here a bit. As you can tell, I'm not a big fan of the way that these organizations tie it all back to NPS and look backward, basically. So
Yeah.
that's another one that is a very good one to debunk. So shifting gears a little bit, like on the, but we're going to stay a little bit on the strategic front, like quantifying the value of customer experience. We talked about it before we started recording, right? There is a lot of scrutiny on CX. If they don't have accountability, then they're typically looked at as nice to haves, not
Hmm.
must haves. So there is today very much scrutiny on the customer experience function. And those that are quantifying their impact are thriving, but a lot of them are trying. So how should we give them tools to quantify their impact? Have you have a framework, a golden formula, and the way that you're doing it, or was it more like the way you described it? That's the way you do it. Like, how do we think about just proving the ROI, consistently scaling it, and what is a good way of starting to frame it in a better way? If we don't have any accountability yet.
Yeah. Um, I think one quick anecdote and thought. I wish I had the data right in front of me. I'd implore any of your CX listeners. I think this is the trend, which is the amount of organizations creating CX organizations has gone up, but the lifetime and the longevity of those organizations is shrinking. And I think that's to the point that you just said, which is I think there's a lot of interest. People know the problem. On the other side, I think because we haven't led with the accountability, eventually they get called to court and just can't rationalize the sustained investment. When it comes into then kind of direct question, um, I'm always a believer a business case. There's only so many business levers that you can pull. I mean, we're either we might go into to new markets that some type of business model or new experience or product or service could kind of lead us into. Um, we could unlock growth, which maybe it's a conversion optimization. Maybe I can look at funnel performance. I can translate that into points and moments in a customer journey. I can understand the jobs to be done of a customer in that, and I can begin to optimize points that match real human problems into kind of funnel performance. We had one of the client partners that we had this issue. Tons of amazing marketing, totally getting awareness out there. People are interested. The next step that they come in, convert, convert, convert. No mid funnel kind of landing place. There was not really an understanding of just the emotional journey and that kind of the soft side for somebody kind of going through there. So we can create those kind of linkages in it. And so when I start to think about the accountability of what's being measured, I mean, is it net new types of revenue? Could do that. I could get new customers. We play a lot, I'll say, maybe it's just a knack that we have, but we play a lot on the retention side of the business, both in terms of just retain your owners, drive cross sell or frequency. And while those sound like business terms, I mean, in reality, if someone's willing to cross sell, there's a greater side of that other coin, which is like, how do we better be helpful in their lives and provide a greater set of experiences for them that naturally, they're just buying more frequently. To me, I start to just break it down and say, hey, or there's the other side of the coin, decrease cost to serve. If I can bring greater scale digital experiences, I can switch people to optimal channels. I can optimize our spend. I can also ensure the fact that it's optimal time consumed, effort consumed by a consumer in that one. So, I think you'd start to just look at those kind of basic levers that go across at a top level around those type of things. And then I can depict those down into like an experience. So if I know the journey stages, I know moments, I know the insights, the performance has to happen as an aggregate of our channels in each moment. And each moment can have kind of a beacon metric. I love the idea of beacon metrics. I just think you got to be careful which ones are kind of big and may not move that fast versus those that are a little bit faster moving. We can kind of measure and get in there.
What would be a good beacon metric, just to give an example of?
Oh yeah, so I might say, hey, I need to increase, revenue growth. But on the flip side, I'd say any beacon metric of a business should be met with a customer. And since we just beat up NPS, I'll just keep NPS. It's just say, hey, NPS, it's our measurement of loyalty. So if I want loyalty, sounds great. On the other side is, I think the benefit is both of those are really hard to track, kind of more tactically in the moments. So now I want to break those down into contributors, into those more moment-centric areas. So if I'm in a mid-funnel, I might take that into some of the performance metrics that go into there, and they shouldn't be task level, but really drive to, is somebody making decisions down? If I'm in retention and I'm really focused on an owner base, there's 1,000 interactions. And so where I'm going to start to look into is beneficial behaviors that impact retention. And maybe I need to go see that is, well, how many people are getting into service? Because I know those that have really good service relationships with us are 2x more likely to be retained, or so, whatever it might be. So, anyway, to your question would be, I would always set up the high level objectives and kind of beacon metrics that sit above a journey, sit above an experience. And then I would go down into the appropriate journey moments and say, what are the KPIs effectively in each one of those? Oftentimes I find a lot of our work gets jumped down into the channels, and now we're kind of task. What's the click-through rate? Did they buy? Did they, what is our daily active usage? But they're not around kind of what we actually need to get done. We're part of WPP, and we got a great sister agency, AKQA. They do some amazing work with Delta and have a really sophisticated kind of measurement that's more based on kind of satisfaction and stuff. I can launch something, and I can quickly measure the pivots of satisfaction on those and quickly jump back. It's just the nature of the type of questions that they're asking in response. I think something like that is spot on, where you're not necessarily stuck at a task level, not clicking like, did they click? I'm looking at an aggregate behavior in a moment, satisfaction in a moment to be able to go. That's what I'd probably shoot for people.
I love how much of your language is focused around business impacts, growth, or cost reduction, if you will. But not necessarily about the usual CX jargon, right? Where we started with. And I think that is the place to look for many of these teams, right? If you can measure satisfaction and you know which initiatives that are you shipping contribute to the change in satisfaction, that's great. Well, if you also layer on the feedback that you get from your different channels and you can pinpoint like, hey, the pain the frustration that our customers are used to have is going to go away, like then you're starting to make impact on your terms as a customer experience team and you're starting to have business impact. But that breaking down like all the way from like the P&L to maybe like the tactical KPIs, I think that's where still a big struggle is. But sharing your perspective like this, I think is a great way to help the community forward and to start to be more vocal and more articulate into the business. Because like debunking a few other things, like only focus on the customer is only going to get you so far, right? And then we're almost into charity.
Yeah, and hopefully that doesn't, to those, being human-centered is essential. I mean, it's really key. It just has to be balanced, the business side. I just think where we are today, the pendulum swung very heavy human-centered and almost forgot the business side to some
Right.
extent. So this is like I would just say a rebalancing. Don't forget your humans. It'd be sad if we came out here 2 years later and it's like everybody just quit business and we don't want that. It's you got to understand the balance between the desirability and the viability of those moments. And it means that might take a balance of the skills and capabilities and people you have in your team to balance those that can kind of see through the lens of human centeredness and have such a respectful partnership with those that are business led that they can come together to kind of push each other.
Right. Where do you think this is going? Like if you have let me ask a different question. If you have a magic wand, like, and you could make something go away or change one fundamental thing about customer experience at large, what would that be?
I I wish everybody had a really capable technology stack, like a really simple, modernized tech stack. For a lot of reasons within organizations, they're running like 7 different versions of AEM. They've got like they got like a patchwork of stuff. Everybody's created their proprietary brain in the middle that like you can't touch that system because if you do, it might stop the whole organization type of stuff. Everybody has that. And the challenge that I have is that usually steps in the way of us to be as human centered, as impactful as possible, because you're just limited by the technology constraints. So, to be honest, if I had a magic wand, I just modernize endlessly the back end of systems to make them complete, to kind of really facilitate the dreams. Most dreams and concepts just die because they're just not feasible. They're just not implementable in
Right.
organizations. And they're just like, that'll take me like 3 years to build. And you're like, well, that's the guys down the street are building it right now, but it's just because legacy systems were never architected in that way for
Right.
that
And you're thinking about
organization.
like actually like building solutions for customers, not even like the data mess that many of the organizations are facing as well. To just unify some customer data together to get an accurate view of what's actually going on.
Yeah, that's like a whole nother thing. I mean, particularly in this day and age, which you didn't even touch about AI, but if you get into that idea of AI driven models, behavioral, how do we think about the impact and then predicting better engagements, most influential and impactful on both sides, better experiences, better business value. That's like a whole nother discussion, but I think that all comes down to kind of modernizing your back end. Just there's some real archaic systems that stand in the way of doing good.
I intentionally steered away from AI as a topic. I have so much going on around this, but I wanted to get your perspective on the basics, on the fundamentals, right? And I think like you covered this really well because digital transformation has been prevalent in the last 2 decades. Now it's all about AI transformation, but we're still focusing on the same pesky problems. It's like, let's get the business moving forward by just aligning better, making better decisions. And in a large organization, customer centricity is typically seen as the way to do it. But it's so hard in practice. So, Ben, thank you so much for joining me today. Is there any place that people can find you when they want to reach out to you in particular that we should put in the show notes and you want to call out?
I'd say probably the most reliable one is just out on LinkedIn. And so Ben Geheb out there, you could search me. That's probably the easiest, most reliable place.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found it valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to the Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by Daydo, the AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit daydo.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends, and here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, keep pushing the edge, stay inspired. See you in the next episode.